Chama a SAMU, moço, vai. Deixa eu ver aqui. Chama a SAMU aí, rapaz.
Liga, gente, pra SAMU.
The video you are about to watch shows the shocking moment a group of citizens in Brazil attempted to rescue a woman who they believe to have been buried alive. Falling victim to a situation like this is a universal fear. Waking up in a coffin, 6 feet underground, in a claustrophobic panic, realizing this is going to be the last thing you ever experience before you suffocate to death. It's a scenario we've seen depicted in media many times before, but the thought of it happening to someone for real is too terrifying to contemplate. But this is exactly what we're witnessing right now. So, how did we get here? But first I have a quick announcement to make. This video is sponsored by Factor 75, and as you guys know, I've worked with HelloFresh in the past, and I'm happy to announce that HelloFresh now owns Factor 75, which means we have so many more meal options to choose from. Personally, I like to use both depending on what I'm in the mood for, but I just wanted to share this with you guys, that way you can enjoy both of these with me at a discount. Sometimes life gets hectic and we just don't have the time to cook, but still want to make sure we're staying healthy. With Factor, you can eliminate the shopping, preparation, and cleanup while still enjoying something delicious and healthy. Factor's meals are always fresh, never frozen, and literally only take 2 minutes to make. All you do is heat it up and then you're done. They have over 35 weekly meals to choose from, and you can also choose from over 45 add-ons to suit your preferences. These include some great breakfast options like red velvet pancakes and apple cinnamon overnight oats. Or one of my favorite options for an easy health boost is their cold pressed juices, shakes, and smoothies. You can try it now by heading to Factor 75 or clicking the link below and using the code ScareTheater50 to get 50% off your first Factor box. I've been pretty busy with life recently, and Factor is just a thing that I've needed for a long time. I've been able to rely on Factor to provide near instant meals that are also healthy. Everything needed is included right in the box, with nutrition facts right on the back. I absolutely went to town on their vegetable ratatouille, and oh my god, their cold pressed juices were divine. I wish I'd tried this sooner. So please do yourself a favor and get yourself a Factor box right now. Head to factor75.com or click the link below and use the code ScareTheater50 to get 50% off your first Factor box. Now, back to the video. The woman in the coffin that's about to be opened is 37-year-old Rosangela Almeida. She's been struggling with a lifelong condition that causes fainting spells and has been on medication for this since she was 7 years old. In 2018, her condition started getting worse as she began to experience severe fatigue among other complications. Her family had her admitted to the hospital to get her checked out, where she stayed for a week. At the end of her stay in the hospital, she suffered from septic shock and 2 heart attacks before losing all vital signs. She was declared deceased that day, and the following day, she was laid to rest in a concrete tomb at a cemetery in her hometown of Riachão das Neves. It was a depressing time, but just 11 days later, the mood quickly shifted from depressing to horrifying. Residents who lived on the street near the cemetery claimed they heard weird noises coming from the cemetery. As they moved to investigate, what they were hearing became a lot more clear. It was the sound of screaming and banging coming from inside the tomb. One witness claims, "When I got there, right in front of the tomb, I heard banging from inside it. I thought the kids who play around the cemetery were playing a joke on me. Then I heard her groan twice, and after those 2 groans, she stopped." Clearly, the implication of this was terrifying. When Rosangela's family was notified about all this, all that was going through their heads was the image of their daughter waking up inside of a coffin, screaming and fighting to get out to no avail for multiple days. Like any family would do in this situation, they immediately made their way to the cemetery to try and free her. That's where this video begins. Oh, and by the way, I want to give a huge thank you to everyone who helped me translate this from Portuguese. I made a post on Twitter asking for help with translations, and you guys really came in clutch.
Chama a SAMU, moço, vai. Deixa eu ver aqui. Chama a SAMU aí, rapaz.
When they opened the coffin, they found that they were too late, and Rosangela had already passed. After the coffin was opened, the ambulance were called and Rosangela was rushed to the hospital where they confirmed that she was dead and then buried again the following day. But Rosangela's mother was not satisfied. She felt that even though they were too late, her daughter was indeed buried alive, and the medical practitioners who incorrectly declared her dead needed to be held responsible. Her reason for believing her daughter was buried alive was because she claimed that there were injuries to her wrists and forehead that weren't there at the time she was buried, her body was in a different position from how she was buried, pieces of cotton that had been stuffed in her ears and nostrils were found outside of her body, and the nails in the lid of the coffin were loose. In addition, some of the people in the video are saying that her body was still warm, implying that she had not been dead for long. As you might expect, this case really blew up in Brazil, and the story even became somewhat popular in the States, with the original YouTube video showing these events gaining over 1.5 million views. But there are some things here that just don't quite seem to add up. The most unbelievable part of the story is that she was buried for 11 days and seemed to have survived up to the 11th day. If you're skeptical of this, you should be, since usually if you're buried in a coffin, you're going to lose all of your oxygen and suffocate within a couple of hours. And even if somehow air was able to make its way into the coffin, there's no way she would have survived any more than 3, maybe 4 days without water. It just wouldn't have happened. A lot of the story is sketchy, and it's difficult to find many in-depth reports of this. One source claims that a police investigation was done on this, and they concluded that the reports from people claiming they heard groaning coming from the coffin may have just been rumors. If all we have to go off of is what people think they heard, or what they heard through the grapevine, then there's bound to be a lot of flaws with the story. The only real objective means we have to look at this is the video, and honestly, it doesn't support the story all that well. I'm pretty sure I can't show this on YouTube, but this frame here shows the inside of the coffin after they opened it, and this looks nothing like what we heard in the story. The body does not look fresh, in fact it looks pretty rotted, and it's laying on its back, not some other strange position like the mother claimed. There's no blood, and everything seems very normal. And although people in the video are saying the body isn't cold, there is also one other observation that they made about the body. The smell. They remark on how bad it smells, kinda like you'd expect rotting flesh to smell. There's a lot of American websites reporting on this, but I wanted a source a little closer to the event itself. So I found a Brazilian news site, G1 Globo, that reported on this. It reports that during the investigation, the police interviewed several witnesses, including a professional from the funeral home, and they said that Rosangela's body was in the same condition as when it was buried, refuting the mother's claim. One of the funeral directors also said that before her burial, she had a liter of formaldehyde applied to her body, which would have made it even less likely that she would have survived after being buried. They even interviewed the hospital where Rosangela was before she was declared dead. One of the doctors said that when she arrived, she already had a serious and irreversible condition. And in addition, she was monitored so intensely that it would have been virtually impossible for them to make a mistake like this. At the end of the investigation, it was concluded that Rosangela was in fact not buried alive. Thank God. What actually happened was people started rumors about hearing noises, word spread to the family, and in a panic, they went to dig up the body in a futile attempt to save their daughter. One unfortunate consequence of this, however, meant that the people involved in opening the coffin could possibly be charged with disturbing a grave, which would carry up to 3 years in prison. But although this particular story didn't turn out to be exactly what everyone thought, that does not mean that things like this haven't happened for real before. In the 17th and 18th centuries, before technology was as advanced as it is today, it wasn't too uncommon for people to be mistakenly pronounced dead and buried alive. One particularly haunting case is that of Alice Blunden, a British woman who found herself in this situation. In the year 1674, she was drinking poppy-infused water to get buzzed, and then Alice Blunden made the blunder of drinking a little too much. She fell into a deep coma, and when she was discovered, it was assumed that she had overdosed and died. She was quickly given a funeral and buried underground when, 2 days later, children who were playing in the graveyard heard screaming coming from underground. They went to get help, but it took another day before someone actually came to dig her up, since everyone assumed the kids were just making up stories. When the grave was exhumed, Alice was found with bruises and blood all over her from trying to escape for days. At this point, they assumed she truly was dead and put her back into the grave, but they kept a guard there overnight just to make sure she didn't get back up again. That night it started to rain, and the guard decided to leave the cemetery and just go off to the pub. I mean, what are the odds that she was still alive, right? Well, apparently the odds weren't that low. When they uncovered the grave the following morning, they found that she had woken up a second time and tore her face and hands to shreds trying to escape. This time, she truly was dead. Holy fuck. Stories like this made the fear of being buried alive so intense that people actually invented something called a safety coffin. The way it worked was that when someone was buried, they would tie a string to their wrist that connected to a bell above ground. So if someone found themselves in a situation where they were buried alive, they would start to panic, and their movements would cause the bell above ground to start ringing, which would alert people that they needed to be dug up. A lot of people will tell you that this is where the phrase "saved by the bell" originated, but that's actually not where it came from. Seriously, Google it. Nowadays, with advanced medical technology, it's virtually impossible for someone to be mistakenly declared dead and buried alive, so it's really nothing to be worried about. The only time this really does happen in modern times is when it is done on purpose. In fact, there are a couple of awful cases of people burying alive their unwanted children in China. In 2015, a couple in southern China decided to abandon their newborn baby boy because he was born with a cleft lip. They chose to abandon him in one of the most brutal ways possible, by burying him alive in a cardboard box 5 centimeters underground. The baby was underground for 8 days before a woman who was collecting herbs heard him crying. She went to get help, and luckily, they were able to rescue the boy, and he's doing okay now. The only reason he was able to survive 8 days was because of rainwater that seeped through the ground that provided him with a little bit of moisture. The dumbest part of this whole thing is that the baby's grandmother and 3 other relatives were arrested, but the parents were not arrested due to a lack of evidence. What the hell is that even supposed to mean? Being buried alive is one of the worst fates possible, and although it is a reasonable fear, there's no real reason to actually be worried about this happening in modern times unless you get involved with the cartel or something like that. And if you seriously are still worried about it, you can always just get cremated or something like that. Thank you for watching, and I will see you on the flip side. Also, big thank you to Factor75 for sponsoring this video.